If you've been following my channel long enough, you'll know that when I travel, I usually make a 50 facts video, but I've decided to retire this format because I believe that it's a little too overwhelming. Instead, I'd like to move to a format that kind of covers the nation or my experience of the nation in a more general sense, while filling in the cracks with the details of my trip. So we're going to move forward with that with my latest adventure to Trinidad and Tobago. Basically, any country that I travel to has something that makes it unique. While I would compare this trip to be most similar to Cuba from last year, it is a Caribbean nation that has all sorts of flavors of its own. It's a bastion of unique culture, and honestly, the land itself gave me more than I anticipated. But before we dive into this, let me give a bit of an overview of the country. Trinidad and Tobago is a dual-island Caribbean nation just barely off the coast of Venezuela. They primarily speak English with a unique accent and a bit of a Creole. Much of the population identifies as Black or Afro-Caribbean, with a heavy Indian minority as well. Much of the food and culture derives from these people groups, with some of the native practices still surviving. The nation's capital is Port of Spain. Politically, it's considered a parliamentary democracy, and Trinidad's economy revolves heavily around oil and gas, while Tobago thrives on tourism. Currently, it has a population of nearly 1.4 million people. Their currency is the Trinidad and Tobago dollar, which is equal to about 15 US cents. So I'm going to preface this by saying this is the first time I took family of the generation above me, my mom and my aunt, on one of my trips. The entire first day was basically traveling, getting harassed at the airport. I'm serious, it was not a good time. And then throwing away my hair gel, because apparently that counts as a liquid. And then my family freaking out as I adjusted driving on the left side of the road for the whole 5-minute drive back to the Airbnb. However, I did get to spend an evening with some folks who lived in the complex of the Airbnb, and I want to give a shout out to my new friend Tia. Right off the bat, I got to try some vodka that was 150 proof, but unfortunately I do not remember what it was called. Alright, so the first actual experience in Tobago. As I said, Tobago is very much a touristy hub. In fact, a lot of folks from Trinidad come to Tobago to vacation, and many of the people that we encountered told us that Port of Spain is rather dangerous at night. Trinidad is somewhat known for having a high violent crime rate, but honestly, most of that is gang-related and targeted, and I'll talk about that some more later. Tobago is also really known for its small streets, and a lot of the walkable areas are around Scarborough. This is right where the only airstrip is on the island, and it's so tiny, like, I think it took all of 10 minutes to get through security and all of that stuff once we arrived to go back. Anywho, Scarborough is mainly one strip that can be traversed easily, and it's lined with several nightclubs, lots of restaurants along it, and they serve everything from gyros to Arabic-style chicken, and of course there's a street stand for doubles. Day 2, getting a little bit of the lay of the land. Aunt Jen's very excited for Sunday fun day. We got folks drinking already. It's 9 a.m. about, and the streets in Tobago do look pretty nice. But the main draw for today was more for my mom and aunt, being primarily a day at Pigeon Point. Pigeon Point, definitely a touristy spot. I don't often spend much time at beaches when I go all abroad, but this has been a good time. Well, it's not a picture, it's a video. Pigeon Point was the highlight of the first full day in Tobago, a really beautiful beach that's right off the tip of the island. The waters here are very clear, with a large bar full of an endless supply of drinks, plenty of food options, and there are bathrooms on site with shops around as well. The island is honestly so small that you can drive around the entire thing with only a couple hours time, and we did just that. There were 3 main sites I had in mind with wanting to hit, the first of those being Fort King George. Our first main objective that wasn't simply laying on a beach, and as you can see, the views here are incredible. Please excuse my gear. I'm not meant for the hot sun the way others are. Fort King George is considered the best preserved colonial fort in Tobago. It gives a great lookout of the coast and allows one to see a large part of the island from where the cannons sit. Something about cannons surrounded by palm trees is kind of cool. It was built by the British in the 1770s, named after King George III, shortly after they gained control of the island from the French. One can walk around and see the prisoners' bell tank, the barracks, the officers' mess, and many other structures. There's even a museum about Tobago as a whole within this, which not only holds colonial artifacts but also Amerindian ones. While Tobago may not be that history heavy, this breaks that trend. Driving a little more inland for a while, we got to the second stop, which was Argyle Falls. And we actually had the pleasure of meeting someone named Brian, who kind of guided us through and actually gave me the objective of climbing to the top of the falls. We're halfway up the falls. Mom and Aunt Jen, they opted to not climb to the top, but I'm taking the whole trek. Right, here we are at the very top of the Argyle Falls. Maybe a 15-minute extra hike. Goes back for miles and miles. Miles and miles, right? Definitely one of the coolest parts of the trip so far. Nice breeze up here too. Argyle Falls is the highest waterfall in Tobago, and they drop at a total of 175 feet or 54 meters. However, they continue up for many kilometers, and one could make a whole day out of this if they wanted. There are several trails around the foot of the falls that have ropes and a lot of bamboo to assist in going up the rapid elevation, but there are 3 major drops in this part, and it was neat getting to go up all 3 and see the height difference looking down. If you go during the wet season, the falls are actually so fierce that the rocks are covered. However, we went during the dry season. To cap this off, the last stop of the day was at a place called Englishman's Bay. This is a far more low-key and less populated spot than Pigeon's Point. It's far more quiet and reserved, but you won't have as much access to amenities. But if you need a bit of an escape, this is worth a stop. This is on what's known as the Leeward coast, not visible from the super windy roads. If you choose to drive here, be ready for some extremely windy turns over some very tight mountains and little gutters on one side that you'll pretty much drop into if you get too close, and really fast cars coming around the corner on the other side. One of those Caribbean drivers. And keep in mind, this is a left side of the road country, so there's an extra layer thrown into that. Anyway, this is a really ideal spot for snorkeling because of how clear the water is, and it is right next to a dense rainforest, which gives it a bit of a unique feel. This actually takes us to evening time, and some other locals that we met took us to a spot that was right off the coast, so you could kind of drink some drinks right by the water. A shout out to Indra and Selena for this recommendation, and for giving us some insight on life in Tobago. Some of the friendliest people I've ever met live on this island, and honestly that goes for Trinidad and Tobago, but Tobago is super safe. For those wondering, the flight between the 2 islands is only about 20 minutes, and you can get a cheap flight through Caribbean Airlines that will take you from island to island. Now, I said earlier that Trinidad is known for its high crime rate, and that some folks warned us about the island earlier, but I'll be honest, I didn't get that much of a feel of this here. Just like when I went to Colombia, if you use a little common sense and you're smart about it, you'll get around just fine. Like I said, most criminal activity is indeed targeted, and unless you're flaunting jewelry or throwing around some kind of attention that makes it sound like you're rich, you'll probably be just a-okay. Driving in Trinidad was honestly much easier. Obviously, Port of Spain is a bigger city, and this just doesn't really exist on Tobago. Something kind of neat was that along the highways, there were these guys walking down selling fruits and water and other types of things to people who were stopped in high traffic areas. Now, arriving at our Airbnb was a breath of fresh air just because of how nice it was. If you ever find yourself in Port of Spain, I highly recommend Stacy's place. It's extremely clean, in a very convenient area, and it's got a pool that has speakers and a projector screen. And of course, the space itself is very cozy, but most importantly, Stacy herself was an incredible host. Walking around our area of Port of Spain, known as St. James, was pretty neat, and for the most part, it was just a day to get a lay of the land and grab some food. The rest of it was mostly spent at the Airbnb with some drinks at the pool. However, I went out on my own later that evening to check out the surrounding areas. So my family has gone to sleep for the night, and I'm gonna walk not quite to downtown Port of Spain, but like a little further in towards the city. Following breakfast at the Upper Crust Bakery, we made our way to the Queen Savannah Park. This is a huge open grassy park where a lot of locals like to hang out, and you'll see plenty of joggers, and you can buy things from the street vendors like snow cones. Me being me, I opted to walk around the entire park, which is huge, covering about 2 miles in perimeter. This would be the largest recreational space in the entire city, lined with salmon and poi trees, and the nation's annual carnival is held here. As a matter of fact, the carnival is held at the beginning of every March, which we just barely missed, but it's said to be one of the greatest cultural experiences one can get from the entire island. It's a massive street performance parade, culminating with Ash Wednesday every year, and lots of high-energy parties as well as competitions take place, and it reflects the multi-ethnic and diverse cultures that are found in Trinidad. But focusing on things that we did actually see. The things that surround Queen's Park Savannah are a lot of the draw, including the Botanical Gardens, some government buildings, Emperor Valley Zoo, and the National Academy of Performing Arts. But most importantly, along one side you can see what was known as the Magnificent Seven. So we're real close to downtown, and actually what we're doing here is taking a picture with all of the Magnificent Seven. They're all mansions or buildings used for different things, but you know, at one point or another had some kind of historical meaning. But my goal is to get a picture in front of all 7 of them right outside of the Queen Savannah Park. These include the Stollmeyer's Castle, the Whitehall, the Queen's Royal College, Ambert's House, Archbishop's Palace, Hayes Court, and Mille Fleurs. Gonna try and briefly summarize all 7 of these. Stollmeyer Castle was built in 1904, also known as the Killarney, meant to be reflective of the Balmoral Castle in Scotland. Whitehall dates back to the same year, also known as Rosenweg, known for its coral stone that takes an influence from the Moorish, Roman, and Greek architectural styles. Fun fact, this also held US military personnel during World War II and was the seat of the Prime Minister for several decades. Queen's Royal College also opened up in 1904, noticing a bit of a trend here, and it stands out due to its German Renaissance feel with red paint. Its notable 93-foot tall clock tower ties it all together, and its open corridors really hone in on that Caribbean feel. The Ambard's house, or the Rumor, goes back to, you guessed it, 1904, built in the style of the Second French Empire. Archbishop's Palace was built in 1903, making it a little ahead of its time, don't you think? This combines a medieval feel with the Indian Empire influence, and the red granite and marble adds to its unique look. This was probably my personal favorite of the 7. Next up, Hayes Court, a simpler French colonial building, originally for the Anglican bishops, the same year as these others. And that takes us to the Mille Fleurs, hoping I'm saying that correctly, which is also from 1904, and it's got an asymmetrical design, also reflective of the French style. Later that evening is when I decided to try some downtown life myself. Came to downtown Port of Spain, but on my way I chose to stop at what is known as the Red House. This is basically like the US equivalent of the White House, but you know, it's red. However, it is the Parliament building of all of Trinidad and Tobago, so you know, check it out. Funny enough, I was actually told that this wasn't a safe area, and I will admit it was rather empty and felt a little less welcoming. However, unknowingly to me, this was a 25-minute walk to the better downtown nightlife area, so I guess I got more exercise that night than I bargained for. The main hub of nightlife is found on Western Main Road, and you can tell you're here based off of all these purple lights that line the streets by the bars and restaurants. It's also a great place to try some street food. I finally got to try doubles, which is basically curried chickpeas served with your choices of sauces between 2 pieces of fried flatbread. Flatbread. One of these places actually had an option to get chicken, and you better believe I added the really hot chilies. I capped off a night at a place called the Avenue Pub House, which I cannot recommend enough. The food, drinks, and balcony type setting along with the street was super nice. I also met these 2 incredible people named Kezi and Sadie, who gave me all sorts of insight around Trinidad. Soca, which is probably the most popular music found in Trinidad and Tobago. Some of the popular artists of this include Skinny Fabulous, Kes the Band, Patrice Roberts, and Michael Montanto. Oh, and something else interesting, like everybody that I spoke to in depth, when they found out I was from the USA, asked about Trump. Because you know, that's like such a hot topic here now, too. But the point is, spending an evening in Port of Spain for the nightlife is absolutely worth your time. So the final full day was kind of split between other things I wanted to do as well as a day more for my family. For one, I kind of wanted to get a look at Venezuela from the island. That's done most easily if you drive to the southern tip, but unfortunately I just didn't have that kind of time to spare because it does take a couple hours. So instead we took a trip to what's known as Bamboo Cathedral. This is a trail where there is so much bamboo that grows, and when they fall they kind of make a slanted shape that somewhat resembles a cathedral. You can see monkeys as well if you're quiet. I went up to the lookout myself since that's a very steep trek. So this is kind of the last thing I really had on the agenda as we leave tomorrow, but I'm walking through what is known as the Bamboo Cathedral. It's not a literal cathedral, but a lot of bamboo covers this trail and makes like a shape. And apparently when we get to the lookout point, it's possible to see Venezuela if it's clear enough. So I guess we'll see when we get there. Yeah, you can't really tell based off of this photo, but I checked the map and I was indeed able to just barely see it from the lookout point of this trail. The second half of the day was another beach day, where we drove out to Maracas Beach. The drive here wasn't quite as intense as the tight roads in Tobago, but it should be warned that it does still get a little intense and windy close to the mountains as well. Maracas Beach was a wide stretch with all sorts of bars and food places, and I spent most of this under the shade because my supreme whiteness already had sunburn. This is also where I got to try bacon shark. Not bacon shark. Trust me, that threw me off too. It's called this because of the type of bread that's used with it, and naturally I loaded it up with sauces so hot that it physically hurt my mouth. The last part of the evening I took my mom and aunt to the same spot I was at the previous night and got a massive plate of wings. Tell you what, it sure was nice to be able to eat some wings that didn't feel like they were pumped full of steroids. Something the American mind can't comprehend. Really no different than when I was in Cuba and Romania and basically everywhere else that I've been. It gave us a total of 3 nights on each island, 2 full days on each island, and while I do think a little more time would have been nice, it did give us just the perfect amount of time to do everything we all wanted to do. Trinidad and Tobago is a place that I think gets unfairly overlooked by a lot of tourists. It's somewhat of a sister country to Jamaica, and the fact that it has influence from different colonial powers, Africans, and Indians gave it all sorts of vibrance amongst the people to the point that I'd even call this place underrated. Like seriously, both islands had some of the nicest and neatest people I've ever met. And actually that's how it's been to all of the countries I've been to within the American continent. Despite its reputation, Trinidad felt very safe and had lots of worthwhile stuff to explore inland and around the coasts. The neat architecture was as great as the nature. And Tobago was a far more touristy spot, but it was very low-key and felt a lot more relaxing in a way. way. But I want to know what you think. If you live or have lived in Trinidad and Tobago, what are your thoughts on the country? Do you think I represented you and your country properly? Did I get a good sense of what life is like here on my trip? Has anybody else been here? I would love to hear your thoughts on this as well. Until we meet again.